Hello, everyone. Welcome to the NBCOT review for developmental milestones. We are going to look at gross motor, fine motor, and then also feeding milestones in this lecture. Okay, so to start with some general principles of development, development is sequential and predictable. We know that development occurs in a certain sequence, and we can predict that sequence. So generally, we know that a child has to sit before they're able to walk, or that they're able to finger feed before they're able to spoon feed. So all this development is in a predictable sequence. Development's affected by maturation and experience. So the more experiences a child has, the more likely they're going to develop based off these experiences and based off their maturity. There's changes in biologic, physiological, and social systems. So we all know kids go through puberty where they have a lot of psychological changes. They have emotional changes. They have biological changes, changes in their body. So this occurs all throughout this development period. And the development also occurs horizontally and vertically. So an example of vertical development would be a child learns to stand independently and then a child learns to walk. So that's that vertical development. Whereas horizontally, it may be that a child learns to stand independently at the same time that they learn to use a radial digital grasp. So it's one area develops, but then they may also have another area developing simultaneously. Another general principle is that in development, progress is an order of three basic sequences. And so this occurs cephalad to caudal, or anterior to posterior, head to tail. So think of during gestation. Developmental gestation occurs from the brain down to the tail first. Proximal to distal, so parts of the body that are closer to the main area of the body are going to develop first, and then distal parts are going to develop last. And then going along with that, you're going to develop gross motor to fine motor. So gross motor skills are going to develop first before you have those fine motor skills develop. So if you're working in pediatrics, you know that you have to have gross motor stabilization before you can have a lot of those fine motor skills really come to fruition. Okay, so the way we're going to go through this is we're going to start from birth and go up to about 6 years old, and we're just going to review the different milestones that occur at each one of these stages. So for birth, in the gross motor field, we're going to be looking at physiologic flexion. The baby's going to move their entire body into extension. They're going to be able to turn their head from side to side as a protective reaction, and they're going to be able to keep their head in at the side when they're in supine. So when baby's laying on their back, they can keep their head to the side. So this is going to benefit things like feeding. For fine motor skills at birth, infants are able to visually regard people and objects. Their hands are going to typically be in fists and flex across their chest during feeding. And they're going to have a really strong grasp reflex, which is that reflex that when somebody puts an object or a finger into their palm, they're going to grasp it. But right now they have no voluntary grasp ability. That's just a reflex. For feeding skills, they're going to be bottle or breastfeeding with a total sucking pattern. They're going to have a mixture of suckling and sucking. These guys aren't going to have complete lip closure, so they'll still have incomplete lip closure. They won't have the strength to bring their lips down onto a bottle or a breast. And then they'll be unable to voluntarily release a nipple. Okay, for 1 to 2 months old, you're going to have gross motor skills in the areas of the infants can practice extension and flexion. They're going to continue to gain control of their head. They're going to be able to move their elbows forward toward their shoulders in a prone position. They're going to be able to weight bear on legs when supported. And then this is also when we're going to see that ATNR, the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. And that is when you turn an infant's head to the side, then that arm and that leg that the face is on is going to go into extension, and then the skull side is going to go into flexion. For fine motor skills for 1 to 2 months, you're going to have a diminishing grasp reflex. So we'll see that when somebody puts their finger or a toy into the baby's hand, we're going to start to see that grasp reflex diminish. And they also are going to start to show involuntary release after briefly holding an object. So it isn't voluntary, but basically after they're holding onto something for a little bit, then they would involuntarily release that object. For feeding skills at 1 to 2 months, The infant may lose coordination of their suck, swallow, breathe with increased head movements. And so basically this means that they're going to start to have more movement in their head, and that's going to interfere with their ability to coordinate that suck, swallow, breathe pattern. They're going to be able to open their mouth and wait for food. They'll start to develop better lip closure, and then they'll have an active lip movement when sucking on a breast or a bottle. Okay, for 3 to 5 month olds in gross motor skills, your ATNR and your grasp reflex are going to be fading away. You're going to see increased balance between flexion and extension. These guys are going to start to develop good head control. They'll be able to go onto the prone on extended arms position, so being over on their belly and then having their arms extended out, usually supporting themselves on their forearms. They're going to be able to bring their hand to their feet and bring their feet to their mouth. They'll be able to prop on their arms while they're in a seated position, and then they'll be able to roll from supine to prone. For fine motor skills, they'll be able to bring their hands to their mouth. They're going to start to develop some of that tactile awareness in their hands. They'll develop increased accuracy with their reach, so they'll be able to reach for different objects. They'll have more of a palmar grasp, so that whole hand grasp, they'll be gripping things with the palm of their hand. They're going to start to transfer objects between hands. So that means maybe they're holding something in their right hand and then they would transfer it to their left hand. And then they have no control of object release still at this point. In the areas of feeding for 3 to 5 months, they are going to anticipate feeding. They're going to recognize a bottle or recognize a breast and recognize that it's time to eat. There's going to be a diminished rooting reflex, and so this is the reflex that when they are stimulated on the side of their cheek, they turn the mouth towards that side. They're going to have voluntary control of the mouth. They're going to start losing liquid from the lip corners. They're going to have introduction of solid foods, usually around 5 months, and we're going to see a suckling feeding pattern during spoon feeding. And then also a lot of ejection of food involuntarily. So you'll see that if you have children, you notice that around 5 months when you start getting them those solids, most of the time, most of it doesn't go into that mouth. So they eject it out of their mouth because of those tongue movements. Okay, at 6 months, for gross motor skills, we're going to have complete head control. They're going to have equilibrium reactions, so that righting reaction to keep their head in midline. They're going to be able to assume the quadruped position, so up on all fours. They'll be able to roll from prone to supine position. And then when you have them in supported standing, they'll be able to bounce up and down. For fine motor skills, they can transfer objects between their hands in supine position, so when they're laying down. They'll be able to shift weight and reach while in the prone position. They can reach with one hand and support themselves while seated. They reach to be picked up. So this is when you see a little one who wants mom or dad or somebody else to pick them up. They put both arms up in the air. So that's that developmental milestone. They're going to have a radial palmar grasp. They'll have visual interest in small objects. So this is when they start to notice different things on the floor, if you have them down crawling around. They're going to rake small objects. So that's that whole handed grasp where they would grab little beads or whatever you're using with them, and they would use their entire hand to rake those objects. And then they begin to hold objects in one hand. Okay, at 6 months for feeding, they're going to suck from the bottle or breast with no liquid loss. They're going to be able to demonstrate long coordinated sequences of that suck, swallow, breathe pattern. They'll be able to suckle from a cup with liquid loss. They cough and choke when they drink too much liquid. So when you see kiddos that first start to drink out of a cup, you notice that they cough and choke a lot because they're usually getting too much liquid in there because they can't control how much is coming into their mouth. They're going to move their upper lip down to scrape food from the spoon. They're going to open their mouth when the spoon approaches in anticipation of that food and that feeding. They're going to have the phasic up and down jaw movements, suckling or sucking on small foods. They're going to begin to move their tongue laterally. So when there's an object placed on one of their biting surfaces, they'll move the tongue laterally to the object. This is where we'll see that they'll start finger feeding, and then you can also introduce spoons here, and they can play with a spoon at this age. Okay, for 7 to 9 month olds, we're going to see gross motor skills shifting weight and reaching in a quadruped position. This is where we're going to see that they start to creep. We're also going to have extension, flexion, and rotation while in the seated position. So they're going to get more movement in that seated position. And at this age, we may see that they may pull to a standing position. So they may be pulling themselves up on furniture, pulling themselves up on tables to a standing position. For fine motor skills, they're going to be able to reach with supination. This is where we start to see some finger isolation, where they can use their index finger to poke an object. They use an inferior scissor grasp to pick up small objects. And then they use a radial digital grasp to pick up cubes. And at this age, we're also going to see that they can start to voluntarily release objects. For feeding skills at 7 to 9 months old, they're going to suckle liquid in a cup. They take fewer sucks and suckles before pulling away from a cup to breathe. This age, they should be able to hold their bottle independently. They can start to feed themselves small crackers. They can hold their jaw closed on soft solids to break off pieces. So this is where we see that they can kind of break little pieces of some of those really soft, like baby mum crackers or something like that. They have up and down movement while chewing. Their tongue moves laterally and their jaw moves diagonally when solids are put on the biting surface. And they can assist with cup and spoon feeding. For 10 to 12 months, our gross motor skills are going to be good coordination with creeping. They're going to pull to stand using their legs only. They'll be able to cruise holding on with one hand, so that's kind of cruising around the room, that supported walking. They'll be able to stand independently. We may see some kiddos that start to begin to walk at this age. And then they're also going to have those equilibrium reactions that are developing while they're standing. So those protective reactions, keeping their head in midline. For fine motor skills, they're going to develop the superior pincer grasp, which is that fingertip and thumb grasp. They'll also have the 3-jaw chuck grasp, which is using those first 3 fingers. And then they're also going to develop controlled release into large containers. So this is when they can pick up something and put it into a large container. For feeding skills, they'll be able to close their lip on the spoon, use upper and lower lips to remove the food. So they'll be able to get that tight seal around the spoon to remove the food. They have controlled, sustained biting motion on soft cookies and crackers. They can chew with a mixture of up and down and diagonal rotary movements. At this stage, they can finger feed themselves, and they can use a spoon with assistance, but typically they're going to invert the spoon before putting it into their mouth. So they're going to turn it over, so most likely anything that's on that spoon is probably going to be spilling off unless it's really sticky. Okay, for 13 to 18 months, gross motor skills are going to be that the child can walk alone. They seldom will fall, so they'll be pretty coordinated at this point with walking if they're developmentally on track. And this is the age where we'll see that they'll be able to start to go up and down stairs. For fine motor skills, they're going to develop more precise grasping abilities, and then they can precisely release objects into small containers. So a lot more of those precision skills. For feeding, they're going to have an up and down sucking pattern on a cup. They have well-coordinated rotary chewing movements by 18 months. They have well-controlled and sustained biting patterns. They're going to get neater with their self-feeding, so they may not be as messy. Stuff may not be getting all over the place. And then they'll be able to hold their cup and then put their cup down without spilling it or knocking it over. Okay, for 19 to 24 months, their gross motor skills are going to have equilibrium reactions while walking. So again, those protective reactions, keeping them upright, keeping their head in midline. They're going to be able to run with a narrow base of support. And then for fine motor skills, we're going to see that finger to palm translation of small objects. So they'll be able to move small objects from their palm and from their finger and then transition them into their palm. Okay, for 19 to 24 months for feeding, they should efficiently be able to drink from a cup at this time, a regular cup with no top on it. And then they should have a well-graded and sustained bite to be able to eat all types of foods. For 24 to 36 months, for gross motor skills, they should be able to jump in place. And then for fine motor skills, we see a lot more of this in-hand manipulation. So palm to finger and finger to palm translation of small objects. So think of having maybe a coin in your palm and then being able to move that out to your fingertips and then back into your palm. They're going to have complex rotation of small objects, so being able to rotate something. So think of like rotating a pencil. They'll be able to shift small objects with palmar stabilization. So again, think of a pencil and then being able to shift your fingers so that they move up the pencil and then move down the pencil. They'll be able to scribble and then also be able to snip with scissors. For feeding skills, they should demonstrate circular rotary jaw movements, close their lips while chewing, they can hold a cup in one hand, handle a spoon more accurately, and they should be proficient in drinking from a straw at this age. Okay, thank you.